And Jason, tell us what's happening in the US.
Well, thanks, and how appropriate that the U.S. goes last. Thanks for having us here, and the reason it's appropriate is because in payments, as I'm about to talk about, we are largely last, and I don't know, oh, here it is, great. So thanks for the opportunity to be here today. Great to be at my favorite European payments event. ETA is the trade association of the payments industry in the United States. We represent about 500 payments companies, all of whom do business in the U.S., not all of whom are based in the U.S., but all of whom have interest in the U.S. market. My job here today, over the next 15 minutes, is to talk about the MPOS ecosystem from the perspective of what's happening both at the point of sale and, frankly, with consumers in the U.S., because the U.S. market is historically behind in contactless, but 2019 is going to be a real push. And I want to talk about where we are and where we're headed. I think it'll have some utility for all of you who are either doing business in the U.S. today or interested in partnering for business in the U.S. as well. So here's where we are today, just numbers-wise. And this is a comparison of mobile POS payment transaction volume between the U.S. and Europe. Now, of course, transaction volume in the U.S. generally is higher than anywhere else in the world. But the reason I'm offering this statistic to start with is because I just want to talk about consumer behavior. And of course, there are many more people in Europe than there are in the U.S. The U.S. population, as you probably know, is about 325 million. Europe's population is over 700 million. But as far as transaction volume in the U.S., if you look at today's numbers, this is actual transaction volume using mobile devices. So the numbers there are in euros, 58 million euros in transaction volume using mobile devices, phones, to pay in the US. That's about twice the transaction volume in Europe, which is about $27 billion. In 2018, you can see that we're projecting those numbers will grow significantly over the next few years. By 2022, we expect 176 billion euros worth of transaction volume on mobile devices in the US. But of course, that remains a tiny fraction of overall payments volume in the US, which is about, today, about 6 trillion with a T, euros. So you can see today, mobile volume in the US is about 1% of overall transactions. Now, one of the reasons that the US has started its contactless journey using mobile devices is because, of course, as you know, we have not deployed contactless cards in the US. Of course, we've just barely started our migration to EMV chip cards in the US, a standard that you deployed successfully here in Europe approximately 2 decades ago. We started our migration in the US in 2015, so just about 3 years ago. We're doing well on the chip card migration, but those chip cards, when they were initially deployed in 2015, were not contactless. They were contact chip only. So for purposes of introducing contactless technology in the US, we did it on the phone. Now, one of the reasons we did it on the phone is because smartphone penetration in the US is very high. 73% of US consumers carry a smartphone, an Apple device or an Android device that is smartphone enabled. Now, of those, 11% have tried using mobile payments, so the number is pretty small. That's about 26 million Americans who have tried using mobile payments. So again, mobile payments users, if we look at the numbers, remembering that Europe's population is approximately double the population of the US, you can see that there are slightly more mobile payments users in the US, but again, the denominator of the math there is there are 740 million Europeans, 326 million Americans. So as you look at that slide, keep in mind, so in 2018, 26 million Americans, that's about 11% of the addressable market, have used mobile payments. In Europe, it's 35 million Europeans who tried using mobile payments in 2018. So in the US, mobile payments, as I mentioned, are slightly older than contactless cards. Contactless cards are being introduced in the US market for the first time this year, really, and we'll talk about the numbers in just a minute. Starbucks really took off back in 2011, introducing a QR code-based mobile payments platform that, by the way, remains the #1 most popular mobile payment service in the US today. Starbucks still has more users even than Apple Pay in the US, and I'll go through those numbers in a minute. You may recall MCX, which was an effort by merchants in the US, about 40 of the largest merchants, to introduce a mobile payments platform in the US. That was launched in 2012 and shut down in 2016. Apple Pay came in the market in 2014, followed by Android Pay, and then Samsung Pay in late 2015. So in the US market, there are basically two business models that have succeeded in mobile payments. On the one side is the NFC model, used by Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay, and some of the bank wallets as well. On the other hand are the QR code, the scanner model, if you will, popularized by Starbucks. Starbucks is NFC enabled in all its stores. However, it still generally encourages its customers to use the QR code on their mobile devices to display a barcode to be scanned at the Starbucks register. Walmart is the biggest holdout today, not NFC enabled in its US stores. So Walmart Pay, its effort at the mobile payments app, still uses a scan technology. And of course, as you've heard about throughout the day today, Chinese tourists who shop in the US using either the Ant Financial Alipay wallet or the other wallets that are available in the US, like Tencent Pay's wallet, those are QR code scan technologies as well. Those are not NFC enabled. So as you look at the contactless mobile wallet landscape, this is the NFC side of the mobile wallet landscape in the US. 51% of consumers have used Apple Pay in the last 12 months, and then you see the percentage for other wallets as well, including Google Pay and Samsung Pay. So this, I think, is very interesting because, as I mentioned, the US market is not a contactless card market, but of course, outside of the US, it's exactly the opposite. So when we talk about tap-to-pay transactions in the US, almost all of them are mobile payments enabled, whereas outside of the US, look in countries like the UK, for example, the vast majority of them are contactless cards. Now, we do expect that to change in the US in particular, but we also expect it to change in Europe and elsewhere in the world as NFC-enabled phones become more popular. Now, the reason it hasn't changed in the US is because US consumers do not have contactless cards. However, Visa has announced that they expect 100 million contactless cards to enter the market in the US in 2019. So that's 100 million contactless cards, up from just a few million in 2018. So that certainly will increase the number of contactless card transactions here in the US going forward. Now, we also expect, as I mentioned, that contactless transactions using a smartphone will increase as well. One of the reasons for that is, as you've heard about today, we've seen the implementation of a new PCI standard enabling consumer devices, COTS devices as they call them, to be used for a PIN pad. We think that will increase the use of mobile devices to pay as well. The other reason contactless is beginning to increase in the US and that issuers are looking to put contactless cards in the market is that more retailers in the US are contactless enabled than ever before. So currently 70 out of the top 100 merchants in the US are contactless enabled. Now, I mentioned before that MCX mobile wallet that was launched in 2012 and shut down in 2016. That was not a contactless mobile wallet, it was a barcode wallet. Merchants had hoped that that wallet would be successful. 40 of the largest merchants in the US were partnered on that. It wasn't until after that wallet consortium shut down that merchants began to adopt NFC technology, recognizing that that was the future for payment in the US. So 70 out of the top 100, including close to all, except for Walmart, of the original MCX partners, companies like Best Buy and Target, the largest retailers in the US, are now NFC enabled. The interesting stat, I think, is that 50% of all POS transactions in the US today occur at a merchant that is contactless enabled. Now, that doesn't mean that 50% of transactions are contactless, of course, but 50% of transactions could be. In other words, they happen at a merchant that has installed NFC capability in the US. And I think that's very important because that's a reflection of the fact that the largest retailers in the US have deployed this technology. The top 100 retailers in the US generate more than half of all transactions in the US. Even though there are 8 million merchants in the US, the top 100 generate more than 50% of all transactions. So that's why that number is so large. Now, not surprisingly, this is happening principally and most impressively, I think, in terms of the numbers, at merchants for whom a fast transaction is very important. So QSRs, what we call quick service restaurants in the US, 79% of QSR POS transactions are at contactless enabled merchants. Again, for fast food restaurants, it's really important to get people through the line very quickly and also to replace small dollar cash transactions with card transactions because cash transactions take a lot of time and don't move people through the line quickly. So that's an area we're seeing people go through. Same thing with drugstores, very important to move people through the line quickly in the US. Large drugstores like CVS have just announced NFC implementation within the last 90 days in the US, and grocery stores as well. So all that is leading us to what we're looking at globally for contactless transactions. So I mentioned that I showed the numbers earlier, global transactions, and this is our friends at Juniper that have this projection, $1 trillion this year, but in just 2 years, we expect it to double to $2 trillion. So why is that? Why is that happening? Well, a lot of that is because of the US deployment of contactless cards. We have that 3-year cycle for card replacement that's starting right now in 2019. In other words, all the consumers who in 2015 and 2016 got contact-only cards from their bank issuers. There are about 1.5 billion of those in the market in the US today. They're all being replaced now with contactless cards. So that's going to drive a lot more contactless transactions in the US and around the world. We've already seen a lot of implementation of contactless cards, obviously here in Europe and in Asia as well, and we expect that volume to increase. And then on the merchant side, we're seeing a lot of implementation of new technology at the point of sale, as I mentioned before, not only NFC-enabled transactions, but new smart POS transactions. So anybody who happens to travel to New York, for example, there's a brand new Nike flagship store on Fifth Avenue, the big shopping street in New York City. And Nike just opened that store about 2 months ago. And they don't have cash registers anymore. They now have all of their sales clerks carrying around Adyen handheld devices that allow the sales clerks to order a pair of shoes from the back to be brought out to try on. You can buy your pair of shoes by tapping your phone or tapping your card on those handheld devices. Or if they don't have it in stock, you can order it from the Nike website. From those handheld devices. So a lot more technology being deployed in stores that really leads to more contactless transactions, and we expect that volume to continue to increase. The last thing I wanted to mention, ETA, our primary job at ETA is to help bring US and international companies together for partnerships here in the US. You've certainly seen a lot of deal activity, more than $53 billion in global financial services and payments deal activity in 2018. That's double, that $53 billion number is double what it was in 2017. We've seen a lot of market entry by European companies and a lot of partnerships by European companies in the US. We expect those deals to continue throughout the year. We are very focused on helping those deals happen. We like to serve as a resource for companies looking to enter the market in the US. We expect a lot of that deal activity to continue to focus on upgrades to POS technology. ISVs, payment facilitators, VARs are the new sales channel, if you will, in the US market. So a lot of the partnerships are focused on software-enabled MPOS solutions for U.S. retailers that are looking for upgrades. To that end, we are here at the best payments event in Europe of the year. It just so happens that ETA produces the best payments event of the year in the United States. I mention this in the context of this discussion because Jennifer Bailey, who runs Apple Pay, is our opening keynoter this year. So if you're interested in hearing Apple's perspective on payments, and many people are, this is the event to attend. It's April 30th through May 2nd in Las Vegas, which is not a bad city to hang out for the weekend in if you haven't spent any time there. So we'd encourage you to go to our website, find out more information about that. Look forward to further dialogue, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Please take a seat.